My brother asked Hazel, "Where's your car?" I adjusted my sunglasses and smiled. My daughter-in-law hid my keys because she thought concern sounded better than control. What Brooke didn't know was simple. The car title was in my safe. The deed was in my name and by tonight. She'd learned the most expensive mistake in my house was forgetting who owned it. "Hazel, why are you on foot? Where's your car?" My brother Julian asked, his eyebrows shooting up as I marched onto his property with a purposeful stride. I adjusted my sunglasses, meeting his gaze with a cool, almost amused composure. "My daughter-in-law thought she could ground me by hiding my keys," I replied. "But don't you worry, by tonight I'm taking back a lot more than just a set of wheels." I wasn't out of breath. I was dialed in. Brooke thought she could back me into a corner with some cheap psychological play, using my safety as an excuse to patronize me. She and my son, Caleb, were living under my roof in our beautiful home in Greenwich, Connecticut, and they had made the fatal mistake of mistaking my hospitality for old age frailty. Brooke wanted the crown, but she'd forgotten who actually owned the kingdom. In this country, power isn't about who shouts the loudest. It's about whose name is on the deed and the insurance policies. While I sat with Julian, I had already dialed a locksmith. I didn't need a tearful confrontation. I needed new deadbolts. When I pulled up to my driveway in a taxi later that afternoon, I saw Brooke sitting on the porch. She was holding a glass of Chardonnay, looking at me with a triumphant smirk, like she'd just disciplined a rowdy schoolgirl who was now crawling home to apologize. I didn't even give her a sideways glance. My target wasn't a debate. It was the safe in my home office. Inside lay the spare key and the original car title. I felt the heavy, cold metal in my hand and knew the game she started was going to end on my terms. In my house, when you break the rules of respect, you lose the privilege of being a guest. I heard Caleb whispering in the hallway, but I simply locked my office door from the inside. The first stone of my fortress was set. Tomorrow, the sun would rise on a new hierarchy, and they were about to find out exactly how much their arrogance was going to cost them. The next morning, the kitchen became my command center. Brooke swanned in wearing a silk robe, radiating the aura of a victor. "Hazel, I hope that walk yesterday did you some good. We're really only doing this for your own sake. You've been so scatterbrained lately," she said, helping herself to my expensive espresso machine. I didn't even look up. I was busy reviewing bank statements on my iPad. "Brooke, your opinion on my driving is as irrelevant as your presence in this kitchen will be next week if you don't change your tone," I said dryly. "Furthermore, I've just revoked the authorization for the joint household account." She froze, mid-pour. Caleb walked in right then, looking confused and a little panicked. "Mom, what's going on? We agreed you'd cover the fixed costs so we could build up our savings." I set my cup down without a sound and looked him dead in the eye. "It means the days of me paying for your private insurance, your high-speed internet, and your organic grocery hauls are over, effective immediately. If you want to control my life, you're going to have to carry the full financial weight of your own." Brooke's face turned a deep, blotchy red. "You can't do that. We have a strict savings plan for our new business venture." I rose slowly and smoothed out my blouse. "Your savings plan is your business. Since you consider me unfit to operate a motor vehicle, I consider you both perfectly fit to pay your own bills without my subsidies." I grabbed my handbag and walked silently to the garage. The engine purred perfectly as I fired it up. I glanced in the rearview mirror and watched them standing in the driveway, stunned as the garage door hummed shut. They thought they could isolate me. Instead, I had just cut off their oxygen. I drove straight to the bank to remove every last authorization. A clean cut is painful, but it's the only way to deal with a parasite. When I got back from my errands, I found a very interesting scene. Brooke had clearly tried to get into my private office, likely looking for the new car keys or my banking records. But the locksmith had been very thorough while I was out. The heavy oak door was now fitted with a high-tech smart lock that only opened with my fingerprint. "What is this, Hazel? Are you locking us out now? This is insane!" She shrieked at me as I headed up the stairs. I replied with a cutting calm. "No, Brooke, it's not insanity. It's a boundary. As of today, the entire second floor is my private sanctuary. You have the downstairs at your disposal as long as I explicitly allow it. My home is no longer a public space." I laid an official-looking envelope on the kitchen island right where Caleb always dropped his keys. "That's a legally binding lease agreement for the first floor," I said as my son entered the room. He looked at the envelope like it was radioactive. "Rent from your own flesh and blood. We moved in to help you out as you got older." I held his gaze without blinking. A son who wants to help respects his mother's autonomy. A tenant, however, pays for the space he occupies. You have to decide which role you want to play in this house, Caleb. If I don't have a signed copy in my mailbox by Friday night, I'll consider that your formal 30-day notice. Brooke tried to laugh a shrill, nervous sound. "You'd never kick us out. Think of what the neighbors would say." I gave her the look I used to give vendors during tough negotiations back in the day. She went silent instantly. I had worked hard and disciplined myself my entire life to own this property debt-free. I wasn't about to be demoted to a tolerated subtenant in my own biography. The silence that fell over the house wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of people who finally realized I wasn't joking. The following days were marked by military precision. I hired a professional cleaning service with strict instructions. Only my private rooms and the common areas were to be touched. If Brooke left her dirty dishes in the sink or scattered her laundry in the bathroom, I didn't nag. I didn't clean it up either. Instead, I packed everything into neutral cardboard boxes and stacked them without a word, right in front of her bedroom door. No accusations, no long-winded arguments, just consistent action. I wanted to show them what their daily life looked like when my invisible, unpaid labor suddenly vanished. Caleb tried to catch me for a talk while Brooke was demonstratively loud on the phone, downstairs, venting her outrage to anyone who would listen. "Mom, she's at her breaking point. She's been crying all day. Can't you just give in once? It's just a car," he pleaded. I put my newspaper aside and looked at him calmly. "Caleb, this isn't about a piece of sheet metal. It's about the fact that she stripped me of my fundamental freedom to secure her own comfort and control. That's not a misunderstanding. It's a deliberate violation, and I never surrender on my own soil." I opened a folder and showed him a detailed breakdown of their expenses over the last 2 years. He went pale as he saw the thousands of dollars I had quietly funneled into their lifestyle. "I have been heavily subsidizing your lives while you worked behind my back to have me declared incompetent." I said, my voice free of bitterness, purely factual. "Those subsidies are now being redirected to my personal enjoyment. I booked a 2-week trip to Maui today. First class. I need a vacation from all your help." The news of the trip hit them like a physical blow. They had been counting on me to house sit and watch their dog for free during their own summer plans. I watched through the window as Brooke saw the UPS driver deliver my travel documents. Her plan to turn me into a live-in nanny and maid had crashed against the wall of my resolve. If you treat me like a burden, don't expect me to lighten yours. By midweek, Brooke tried one last desperate provocation. She parked her beat-up old sedan sideways across the driveway, making it impossible for me to get my SUV out of the garage. She figured she could force a confrontation or a compromise. I saw the obstacle from my balcony while I finished my tea. I didn't go down to beg or yell. That would have been a waste of energy. Instead, I picked up the phone and called a local towing company. I reported an unauthorized vehicle blocking a private driveway on my property. When the tow truck rumbled into the driveway 10 minutes later, Brooke came charging out of the house, hair flying. "Are you out of your mind, Hazel? That's my car. You can't do this," she screamed. The driver looked at me confused. I stepped onto the porch and showed him my property deed and ID. "This is my private driveway, and this vehicle is parked here without my consent blocking my exit. Please remove it at the owner's expense," I said in a voice that allowed no backtalk. Brooke had to stand there helpless and fuming as her car was hooked up in front of all the neighbors. It was an incredibly expensive lesson, but a necessary one to clarify exactly who owned what. Caleb stood in the dark doorway with his hand over his face. He was mortified, but he didn't dare intervene. He finally realized I was within my rights and that I would enforce them to the letter. Once the path was clear, I got in my car, tipped my hat to the driver, and headed to my weekly ballroom dance class. I was right on time. That evening, I left the towing invoice on the kitchen table. "If you block the driveway tomorrow, it'll be even more expensive," I said as I walked by. There was no drama, no shouting. In my house, my traffic laws apply. Period. The power balance in the house finally stabilized after the towing incident. Brooke had painfully learned that any further attempt to manipulate me would result in immediate financial and practical consequences. The Cold War was over because she stood no chance against my objective hardness. She started transferring the rent amount stipulated in the lease on the first of the month grudgingly, but on time. Caleb suddenly started handling the yard work and the basement chores, without me having to ask twice. It wasn't a sudden return of love, but it was the restoration of a necessary order. I began systematically redecorating the house to my own taste. I replaced the heavy dated furniture downstairs, the pieces Brooke loved, with modern minimalist items I had picked out myself. She hated the new style, but she didn't dare say a word. It was my capital and my taste setting the tone again. I took visible pleasure in regaining absolute control over my environment. Every new piece of furniture was a silent reminder to both of them of who paid the bills and who was merely a guest. One evening, Caleb came to me and asked almost shyly if we could all have dinner together again, like the old days. I looked at him and saw a genuine wish for peace. "I'd like that, Caleb," I replied, kind but firm. "On one condition. Brooke cooks what I like and she handles the entire cleanup afterward. I am a guest when I dine on the first floor." He nodded, defeated. The dinner was surprisingly civilized. Brooke was noticeably trying to be polite, almost submissive. I watched her with the cool curiosity of a scientist. She was no longer the secret mistress of the house. She was a temporary resident who had to justify her status every day. I talked about my plans to renovate the attic into a hobby studio. I was making room for my life, not their expansion plans. If you want a seat at the table of power, you have to accept the chef's rules. I noticed that my refusal to budge had actually sparked a change in Caleb, too. He started standing up to Brooke when she tried to take her frustrations out on him or gossip about me. "Give it a rest, Brooke. Mom is completely right." We crossed the line. I heard him say, late one night in the stairwell, "It was a small victory, but it meant the world to me. I hadn't just saved my own autonomy. I had perhaps liberated my son from a destructive emotional dependency." I spent my newly reclaimed time on things I had neglected after my husband passed. I bought a high-end e-bike and explored the trails along the coast. Everywhere I went, I radiated a confidence that didn't invite rude questions about my age or my stamina. The fragile widow Brooke wanted me to be was gone. There was only Hazel, the woman who planned her own routes and drove them herself. Brooke tried one last time to bring up the early inheritance topic when we crossed paths in the garden. She wanted to know if I could put part of the house in Caleb's name now for future security. I just laughed softly and clipped a rose. Why on earth would I do that, Brooke? So you can use legal means to push me out of my own home after the key hiding trick failed. This house remains mine until my last breath. After that, my will determine who proved themselves worthy. That was the end of the conversation. She knew for certain now that there was no shortcut to my assets. Everything they wanted from me in this life had to be earned through respect and good behavior. I had completely flipped the script on dependency. Now they were the ones hoping I had a good day. And my mood was excellent because I was once again the master of my time and my choices. Winter arrived in New England, and with it came a massive spike in heating costs. Brooke had quietly hoped I'd just swallow the increase like I used to out of convenience. She was dead wrong. I handed her the exact invoice for their floor's share, calculated down to the square foot. This is your additional portion for the month. Please have it transferred by the first business day, I said, devoid of emotion. She grumbled loudly about inflation and their tight budget, but I remained as unmoving as a granite statue. Life is expensive, Brooke. Especially when you enjoy the luxury of living in a prime neighborhood without carrying the risk of the mortgage. I had also started getting active in the local community again. I organized an exclusive book club and hosted the ladies regularly, but only in my newly designed rooms upstairs. Brooke had to stay downstairs, listening through the ceiling to the sound of me and my friends laughing, debating, and drinking fine wine. She was the one who felt isolated in her own living space now, despite being in the same building. One afternoon, she came to me almost humbly asking for a loan for a new car, since hers was back in the shop, and the repairs cost more than the car was worth. I looked at her and vividly remembered the morning she stole my keys, as if I were a child. I think it'll be a great growth experience for you to handle this purchase entirely on your own, Brooke. You only truly appreciate the value of mobility when you've worked for every cent of it yourself, I replied. There was no going back to my old, soft-hearted ways. I was always polite, yes, but I remained professionally distant. That emotional wall was my most effective protection against further overreach. Caleb watched this development in silence. He knew I hadn't built this barrier out of malice, but as a direct response to their betrayal of my trust. I enjoyed the clear, cool air that this new arrangement created. My 2 weeks in Maui were a total success and the ultimate confirmation of my freedom. I sent Caleb a brief postcard, but I intentionally left Brooke's name off it. When I returned tan and refreshed, I found the house in impeccable condition. In my absence, they had realized that my being away wasn't a free pass for laziness. It was a test of their future right to stay. That evening, I discreetly checked the common areas and the utility bills. Everything was correct. The responsibility training was mostly complete. The following weekend, I invited Caleb for a drive out to the shoreline. I drove my car, of course, sitting behind the wheel with total confidence in the heavy weekend traffic. He was quiet for a long time, just staring out at the ocean and the passing lighthouses. "Mom, I have to tell you something. I truly admire you." He finally said, his voice a bit thick. I thought you were going to break under the pressure when we moved in. I thought you needed us. But the truth is, you're mentally stronger than both of us combined. We were the weak ones, not you. I smiled slightly and shifted gears precisely. Strength isn't about age, Caleb. It's about your mindset and the decision to never let yourself be a victim, I replied calmly. We had a harmonious day, almost like the years before Brooke moved in. She wasn't a topic of conversation. She had been demoted to a footnote in our mother-son relationship. She was now just a roommate who functioned because the system I established gave her no other choice. That evening, I sat on my balcony and watched the purple sunset over the town. I was nearly 70 and I felt more alive and powerful than ever. I had successfully defended my life, my home, and my dignity against greed. I wasn't a tragic heroine. I was just a woman who knew her worth and her property. And I was ready to make sure it stayed that way every single day, with unshakable discipline and total peace of mind. Today is a special day. I'm celebrating my birthday, and the house is full of life. I've invited my closest friends. Julian is here, and even Caleb went all out decorating the patio. Brooke is serving the guests with a professional level of restraint. She's definitely not doing it out of pure love, but she knows exactly what's expected of her if she wants to continue living here. I sit at the head of the long table in the garden, savoring every moment of this validation. No one in this circle would ever dream of asking me again if I'm still capable of managing my life or driving my car. I've proven through my actions that I hold the reins tighter than the generation coming after me. My SUV sits freshly washed and gleaming in the driveway, a visible symbol of my untouchable independence. Brooke sees that car every day, and every time it's a stinging reminder of her failed coup. I recently made a big decision and shared it with Caleb. A significant portion of my liquid assets will go into a charitable foundation rather than being part of his inheritance. He'll be left with enough to be comfortable, but he won't become obscenely wealthy from my passing. I want my life's work to mean something lasting rather than just funding Brooke's expensive lifestyle in the future. Caleb accepted the decision after a brief hesitation. He's learned that my generosity isn't an entitlement. It's a privilege earned through loyalty. As the last guests leave and the familiar quiet returns to the house, I take my car keys from the hook in the hall and drop them into my purse. Tomorrow morning, while the town is still asleep, I'm driving out to the coast just to feel the salt air. Simply because I have the freedom to do it and no one can stop me. I lock the door to my private quarters and hear that familiar, solid click of the bolt. It's a wonderful sound. It's the sound of real security and absolute freedom. My name is Hazel, and this was and always will be my house. Control is not always loud. Sometimes it starts with someone touching your keys, your money, your space, then calling it concern. Hazel did not beg for respect. She made it expensive to forget who owned the house.